Hey, all you cool cats and kittens. It's Carol Baskin, and you are listening to Fascination Street.
I believe that everybody has a story, and I'm fascinated to hear them. So come with me as we take a walk down Fascination Street. Welcome back, Streetwalkers. This episode is with Jolee Kasprzak. Jolee is the marketing director for the Spirits of French Lick Distillery and the French Lick Winery based in French Lick, Indiana. In this episode, we talk about where she was born and raised and what led her to French Lick, Indiana. We also talk about how she got into wineries and distilling, that side of the booze business. Of course, we talk about a number of both the winery products and the distillery products. And then finally, we talk about bourbon nerds and what that is, and the secondary bourbon market. If you are ever in or near French Lick, Indiana, I highly suggest stopping by their tasting room. Enjoy some fine spirits, some great wine, and apparently there's a restaurant there. In this episode, she does mention some of the states where those products are available. They're not available in most states, but in the states that they are, I suggest you see if you can't get some. While I haven't sampled all of their products, the ones that I have had are absolutely amazing. I'm a bourbon nerd and a whiskey weirdo, so I have 100% enjoyed the Lee Sinclair and the Maddie Gladden, and I think you will too. This was recorded during all the self-distancing due to the coronavirus outbreak. So if that is over by now, woohoo. If not, damn it. But either way, this is my conversation with the marketing director of the French Lick Winery and the Spirits of French Lick Distillery, Jolee Kasprzak.
Yeah, talk to me, yeah.
Welcome to Fascination Street Podcast, Jolee Kasprzak. How you doing today, Jolee?
Hey, I'm great. How are you?
I am wonderflonium. For those who don't know, Jolee and I got connected through previous guests, and I'm assuming mutual friend Jesse Vest, bass player for Days of the New, Tantric, and now Blitzkrieg. I know you're listening, Jesse. Thank you very much for connecting us and making this happen. Jolee, what I like to do is start to get to know folks by where they were born and raised. It kind of gives us an idea of how they got to where they are from where they were. So take it away. Where were you born and raised? Where'd you grow up?
I was born in Palm Springs, California. I was raised in Santa Clarita, which is in LA County, just about 20 minutes north of Hollywood. So it's quite a ways from where I am now.
That is the truth. How old were you when you left California?
When I moved to Indiana, I was 25.
Did you follow a boy? Why'd you move?
I did follow a boy. I had met my now ex-husband through a mutual friend, and we did a long-distance relationship for several months, and then I was managing a restaurant, a microbrew in Santa Clarita, and he was a tech guy, I guess you could say. I don't really know, in the computer industry. And in California, the Silicon Valley bubble had just popped. And so we did headhunters for him to come out to California, but he was a dime a dozen. But back here in Indiana, his skills were coveted. And so it didn't make any sense for him to move out to California, but it made complete sense I could manage a restaurant in any state. So here I found myself, and here I've stayed.
Nice. So what attracted you to the restaurant biz, that particular restaurant that you were working in Santa Clarita? Was it the fact that it was a microbrew? Did that aspect of it appeal to you?
I kind of grew up in the restaurant business. My grandfather owned a restaurant, kind of just is in my blood. At 15 and a half, I got a job working in Six Flags in the food service industry, and then just kind of moved from there. So I went as far as I could go. I was managing a very large restaurant within Six Flags, and then went to a full service restaurant within my town. And then a friend of mine was managing at this microbrew and asked if I would be interested. And I moved over there and went from being the hostess to, I did some bartending, not a lot, caterings, and then did managing there. So I always credit them for that's where my love for booze started. Before I went there, I was drinking like Corona and just like shitty beer and shitty wine. And Rob and Lena McFerrin own it. It is called Wolf Creek Brewery. And they kind of taught me how to taste. So we were allowed to have one free shift beer with every shift. Everything was from scratch too. So it was a scratch kitchen. So all of their food was homemade, and then you had the beer. And so they did a lot of beer pairings. They did wine pairings. They had their wine reps come in, and they didn't just teach you how to open a bottle of wine and how to pour it for their customers, but how to taste it. And they taught you about it. I always credit them to kind of setting me on my path as far as the booze industry goes.
Gotcha. So you found yourself in Indiana following a boy.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find yourself in French Lick, Indiana, or some other part of Indiana, and then you eventually got to French Lick?
Yeah, French Lick is about 40 minutes from where I am. So I commute every day, 30 to 40 minutes, depending on if I get stuck behind a tractor or a large piece of farm equipment or a slow semi. It's a 2-lane highway to French Lick from Jasper. So it just really depends on if I can get there without getting behind a combine, then I can get there in 30 minutes. Otherwise, it takes about 40 minutes. So
that is hilarious.
I don't live in French Lick. It is the truth.
Oh my gosh. I live in a small town outside of San Antonio, and more often than I care to admit, I'm stuck behind something that moves creepy, crawly, slow. And I'm like, why? Why? You could probably drive on the grass. Yeah. I can't move.
Yeah. It's infuriating, especially when you see like a long line of traffic. And so you're driving up and you see this giant combine. And I mean, we're in a very rural area surrounded by soybeans and corn. Indiana is a big farming state. And so I try not to get mad because it's where my food comes from. You try and center yourself in your car, but it is hard when you've got places to go and things to do.
Well, for you, it's probably particularly interesting because not only is it where your food comes from, but it's where your booze comes from, which is where your money comes from.
Yep. Yep. That's right. I think a lot of people don't think about that when they drink bourbon.
I certainly don't. Not
right.
Far from me, there's a little town called Fredericksburg, Texas, and it has, across the hill country in Texas, there's something like 120 vineyards and wineries or whatever around here. And then also there is a bourbon distillery, Garrison Brothers.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I remember the first time I went there, you got to drive down, just like every distillery, every winery, you have to drive down this long, winding road in the middle of nowhere. And I was just surrounded by corn. And I'm like, what's with all the corn out here? Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's actually kind of where bourbon came from. It was part of the local food shed and a way to make your crops go further than just selling it and food. It was a part of food preservation. So, yeah.
I love that. I used to live in Louisville for a very short time, like a year and a half. And I did as many tours and as many tastings and all of that as I possibly could during that time. And so I feel like I learned kind of a lot about how bourbon is made and why it's in that area and why the rivers were, all that other stuff.
Right.
Oh, and I think I heard that just like wine, bourbon is made in every state in America. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. It's most well known coming from Kentucky because that's Kentucky's thing is bourbon. But if you go back to pre-Prohibition, there was just as much bourbon coming from the Ohio, Indiana region as there was from Kentucky. I can't really speak to Ohio, obviously, because I don't live there. But Prohibition hit Indiana quite a bit harder than it hit Kentucky. And so Indiana is still dealing with a lot of crazy, stupid laws that are in effect from Prohibition and still trying to bounce back from that, as crazy as that sounds. It wasn't until 2016 that they opened up the farm distillery law, allowing people to open up their own distilleries, and it opened it up to people who had previously owned farm wineries permit before, which was how Spirits of French Lick was formed, because it is in an offshoot of the French Lick Winery that turned 25 last year.
Okay, so the winery came first, French Lick Winery in French Lick,
very
Indiana.
much so.
You work for both of those, right?
I'm the marketing director for both French Lick Winery and Spirits of French Lick.
Okay. How did you find them or they find you?
So French Lick Winery is a very well-known product within the state of Indiana. The winery is 25 years old. It's a family-owned business. It was started by John and Kim Doty and has been passed down to Nick and Aaron Doty, the two sons. And in addition to Laurel and Doty, they are running it together now. It's been kind of passed down to the next generation. So French Lick Winery is very well known. It is distributed in every single CVS, Walmart, Costco, gas station. They're known for their sweet wine. They have 13 sweet wines in the bottle. We actually should be opening up Texas in 2022. They opened up 3 new states this year. So we are distributed in Indiana, Kentucky, soon to be Louisiana, and then we just opened up Mississippi this year as well. But kind of once you live in Indiana, everybody knows about French Lick Winery. They know, what they are, who they are, what they do. I became friends with Nick Doty. We live in the same town. We went to the same bar. We, started hanging out and became great friends. And so that's how I kind of knew them. Once their marketing director stepped down, my husband was the GM for their restaurant. And he said, hey, do you want to ask Nick if, they'd be interested in having you as a marketing director? At the time, I was managing a full-service restaurant here in Jasper and had been for several years. And anybody that works in a full-service restaurant knows that quickly breaks your body down. So I was hurting all the time, and I was looking for something new, something different. And I was like, I don't know anything about marketing. That's not really my thing. I can't really do that. And then they went without a marketing director for several months. And he brought it up to me a couple of times. And so then I approached them and said, hey, are you interviewing for this position? And they were interviewing within the company as well as outside of the company. So I think I interviewed alongside of a couple of other people. And then I was hired.
So you mentioned restaurants, plural. You said that I guess your ex-husband was the GM of their restaurants.
My current husband was the GM.
I'm so sorry.
I have remarried. No, that's okay. It's not a big deal.
Okay, so the family, the Dotys, they have restaurants as well?
Mm-hmm. So the French Lick Winery consists of we're a tourist location, right? We're located in the middle of French Lick, West Baden, which is this sleepy little valley that you'd think, Springs Valley. You kind of drive in, it's very unsuspecting. You drive through a very rural area, and then you come in, and there are 2 large resort hotels. There is an indoor water park. There's an animal drive-through safari. There's go-karts. There's laser tag. There's mini golf. There's all kinds of stuff in this area because of the 2 very large resort hotels that are in the area. One of them is the West Baden Dome, which was the largest freestanding dome in the United States until the Superdome was built in New Orleans. So the history of the area goes way back. So French Lick Winery consists of a gigantic tasting bar. Obviously, they don't just make sweet wines. They have 30 plus wines ranging from dry to semi-sweet, sweet, fortified, and sparkling. So a very large tasting bar. They have a full service Italian cafe and a gift shop. And then in 2016, they added a distillery. So it's a pretty good size operation.
It sounds pretty big. And how big is the restaurant?
Pre-COVID, we had a capacity of about 150 people.
Oh, cool.
Maybe 200.
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty large. It's a good size restaurant.
You said that there's a whole lot of different wines, and you said everything from like a bold dry cab to like fortified. Does that mean port?
Yes, port and sherry, which is my favorite. It's delicious. So they've got Merlot, Chardonnay, Vidal Blanc, got a Noiret. They have a vineyard just 1 county over located on their Hoosier Homestead Farm, which is a designation given to families that have a farm in their family for over 100 years. So their farm has been in their family since 1888. So it's about 133 years old, passed down uniquely from female to female.
Oh, wow.
Yep. This is their 6th generation owners now. And so 25 years ago, they decided to, or probably about more like 23, they decided, I think, to start the winery, purchased grapes at first, and then planted a vineyard on a giant hill in their farm, allowing the vineyard to have great drainage. And we're part of the movement to help bring AVA, which is the viticultural area, a designated government area that says this soil is prime for growing grapes, to Indiana. So there's some of the AVA is in Indiana. There's some AVA in Missouri. Obviously, you know about in Napa Valley, Sonoma County, those types of things. But there are those regions in a few other states. And so our grapes are grown within the Indiana AVA. It's called the Indiana Uplands. So we have an estate wine lineup as well.
Nice. And you said your favorite is the sherry?
Yeah, I love it. It's made on the Solaris system, which means a little bit from the batch before goes into the new batch. So technically there is wine in each bottle dating back to like 2009, I think, is when they first started making that.
Wow.
So yeah, it's delicious. I love it. Yeah,
Very
it's called
cool.
Mon Chéri.
Mon Chéri. Nice.
Mon Chéri. And you can buy it on FrenchLickWinery.com.
Sweet.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Spirits of French Lick is bringing traditional double pot still distillation back to the Hoosier State. We pay tribute to the many distilleries that once dotted the southern hills of Indiana pre-Prohibition and focus on using the best practices of those early times with the improved methods of today. Our bourbon, brandy, botanical spirits, and American whiskey are created from the finest grains. From field to glass, we present to you the best in small batch American distilling. Spirits of French Lick. Respect the grain, drink responsibly, and please be 21 years or older.
Let's get back into it.
So you also mentioned that you were getting ready to open up Texas and you had recently opened up some other states. And when you say open up, is it a paperwork thing? Is it a quantity thing? Like, were you guys just selling so much that you weren't able to sell it elsewhere because you didn't have enough product? Or is it a paperwork and legal thing to open up another state?
So it's both. You have to have permits to do business in other states, and especially when alcohol is concerned. Some states are what they call control states, where you have to be approved by the government to come in. And then once your product comes in, it's held in a government bonded warehouse and then distributed straight to the stores as opposed to going through a distributor. Most of the alcohol industry works on a 3-tiered system where you goes from the purveyor to the distributor to the liquor store. And then sometimes the government owns those liquor stores or leases permits for liquor stores. Indiana is not a control state, so I don't really know. And each one is different. Louisiana is a control state, but they get away with a lot more than like Ohio does. Ohio, you have to sell a certain amount of cases in order to stay on their approved distributed list every year. I don't know. It gets a little funky. Again, going back to Prohibition, which I think a lot of people don't realize how much it affects what you're able to get at your house. But yeah, it's a paperwork thing. And then we're a small business. I mean, for as much wine as we produce, we've got one head winemaker, Nick, who's the owner. We've got one assistant winemaker, Wayne. And then we've got a few employees that help bottle, and that's all. So it really depends on how much we're able to do, how much juice we're able to get in to make the distributed wines. And so it is a paperwork thing, but sometimes it's a volume thing. That's why Texas has been pushed back, because we can't do Indiana and Kentucky and open up Mississippi and open up Louisiana and supply wine to Texas on just to people making it. We want to make sure that we aren't burying ourselves.
Sure, yeah, that makes 100% sense. Make sure you're ready for the avalanche of wonderful things that will happen.
Right.
Is your winery small enough to be considered a boutique winery, or is it bigger than boutique?
Yeah, I think it's bigger than boutique. We do 60,000 gallons a year, taking it up to about 75,000 this year with opening up distributing in Mississippi. So I think once you're being sold in CVS and Walmart, you've passed the boutique phase.
So you guys are sold in those places?
We are, yeah. Within Indiana, we're sold in pretty much most Walmarts, CVS, Walgreens, a lot of gas stations. The sweet wine runs anywhere from $18 to like $11. So it's a lower priced wine, but we feel really great about what we're putting out. Our fruit wines start with the whole fruit, like our cherry pie starts from Montmorency cherries. Our rhubarb starts from whole fruit rhubarb. So we feel really good. We don't water down the wine in order to get more. I think that's another reason. Maybe if we watered down our wine, it'd be easier to distribute more, but we insist on a really high quality of what we're putting out there. So, we take pride in what we put out. But yeah, I don't think we're boutique anymore.
Gotcha.
I wouldn't say that we're a huge winery either. There's several wineries in Indiana that are much larger than us. But again, you have to temper that growth, I think, with what you're able to put out, and you want to make sure that you're meeting expectations and not disappointing anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that sometimes companies maybe grow too fast, or the popular, I guess, nomenclature is like they get over their skis, right? So they can't really handle what they're promising or what they're trying to do. I think one of the greatest examples was, this is going to sound weird, but Kmart. So back in the day, Kmart, they were really, really good at opening stores. They were opening them on a weekly basis at one point. They were just opening. And when they took a step back and realized how many stores they had, they stopped opening them and started running them. And then they ran them into the ground because they were better at opening stores than running them. And so it's good to know that the people that are helming the French Lick Winery are not trying to make those mistakes. Let's move on to the distillery because as much as I do love wine, and here at my house, we have roughly 500 bottles of wine, that number has come down dramatically during COVID. Let me just say that. But while we do have all that wine and we love a good wine, living in Louisville for a year and a half changed me. I used to...
As it does.
Yeah. Jack Daniels used to be my favorite spirit. I can't drink that stuff anymore.
Right.
So I call it my cage because, well, it's a cage. I have a bourbon cage that at all times has more than 30 different bourbons in it. And sometimes that makes the decision so much harder about what you're going to drink. Too many choices.
Yep.
So as I was saying, as much as I love wine, I love bourbon. All right. So I like wine as a friend, but I am in love with bourbon. So let's talk about the distillery. I know that the French Lick Distillery, you said they started building it in 2016?
Yeah, they started really working on it towards the end of 2015 when they knew that the farm distillery permits were going to come through and be approved by the state in 2016. So they were able to kind of hit the ground running. Alan came on board, I believe, in April of 2016. And I know you're interviewing him later on this week, so you'll have to double check that date. But I'm pretty sure that that's what it was. And he was a big part of setting up the distillery and the stills. Some of the stills were there when he came along. All the mash bills are his, save for a few. John Doty has a few mash bills as well. Alan has made a lot of those himself. And so they were really able to hit the ground running and start distilling as soon as possible, because nothing starts right away as far as bourbon goes. You've got to distill it, put it in a barrel, and then sit and wait, which I think is the hardest part. So they did a lot of clear spirits right out of the gate.
They did a lot of clear spirits so that they could start selling some and not just sit on their hands for a minimum of 2 years. Because bourbon, I think, has to sit in a barrel for 2 years or something like that before they can sell it, according to the bourbon laws or whatever. But let's talk about all the different products that the distillery makes. As far as I remember, you guys make everything except tequila.
Right, which we're not allowed to make because we're not in Mexico.
Sure.
But just to clarify, you can put something in a barrel for 5 minutes and call it bourbon.
Oh.
In order for it to have the category of straight bourbon whiskey, it has to be in the barrel at least 2 years. In order to be taken seriously by any bourbon lover, your bourbon has to be at least 4 years old. And really, I think the sweet spot, which most people agree, is anywhere from 6 to 8 years. So we just released our bottled and bond bourbons, 4 years old, as you know, in July and August. We did come out with a 2-year bourbon. We came out with a 2-year Lee Sinclair, and a lot of people gave us shit for it. But I dare those people to open up a distillery of their own and not release a 2-year bourbon. Owning a distillery is expensive. And so that's where those clear products came in. We did the first commercial absinthe in Indiana. We put out our Absinthe Le Bleu. We have an aquavit. We have a gin. We've got an immature brandy called Sun Rojo. We've got an apple brandy. We've got maple syrup barrel rested aquavit. We have an eau de vie. We have a rum, which we will never make again because it was a huge pain in the ass, but we've got it. And so because we are a farm winery and a farm distillery, we are not allowed to have alcoholic mixers behind our bar. We can only sell our own product. We can only craft cocktails with non-alcoholic mixers and our own product. So we're pretty fortunate that we make everything because our bar is well stocked. So you can come in and get a gin and tonic. You can come in and get a whiskey sour. You can come in and get a rum and Coke. And it's still, all of our own top shelf products.
Nice.
Alan likes to say, we've got something for everyone. What does he say? He says, we're the pharmacopoeia, is that the word, of distilleries? It won't fix your problems, but it'll make you forget about them for a while.
That's funny. And so, Streetwalkers, every time she says Alan, she's talking about the master distiller, Alan Bishop, who you will hear on a later episode.
Hates being called master distiller.
Really?
Yeah.
What does he like to be called?
He hates it. Head distiller.
Oh, thank you.
He'll explain this to you because it's a talking point on most podcasts that we go on. You're different. You decided to do us two separate. Most people have us on together, so it's nice. I enjoy being on podcasts with Alan. I don't want to say that. We have a fun-loving relationship. Yeah, I think he really feels like there's always more to learn. So that's why he doesn't like that term.
Oh, gotcha. Sort of like practice makes better, not perfect.
Correct.
So you said, I dare anyone to open a distillery and not sell it to your bourbon because it's expensive. I heard that this applies to wineries and distilleries, that the way to make a little money in those industries is to start with a lot. and then it just whittles down to a little because it's so expensive.
I think that most distilleries start with sourcing product, right? Which we did. We have one blended bourbon that has 7-year-old sourced merchant bourbon mixed with 2-year-old pot distilled of ours, 60% ours, 40% merchant bourbon. But a lot of distilleries start making their own and then they purchase barrels from MGP or other distilleries, bottle that, and then once their bourbon comes of age in 4 years, then, they kind of start to phase out the sourced bourbon and put their own on the shelf.
Got you. The 60-40, what bourbon is that? It's
called the Weeder, and that will phase out. That's going to be replaced by William Dalton, which it will be 100% our own product. We absolutely don't see anything wrong with sourcing bourbon. We've got a lot of great, brands and products that source from MGP and source from other distilleries. And so it widens the catalog. But we always say that there's just a lot of pride in distilling your own product and seeing it on the shelf.
Yeah.
So the Weeder is the one and only time we have sourced products. We probably won't ever do it again.
So just like the rum, the Weeder and the rum are a limited edition.
Right. Correct.
I want to talk about the names of these products. Some people, when they name products, they name it, they'll just say like, this is rum or this is bourbon. You guys don't do that.
Yeah.
You guys give like a
Don't.
first and a last name, like a people name to your stuff. So we got the Lee Sinclair, the Maddie Gladden, the William Dalton. But what's the name of the apple brandy? That has a name too, like Clifty or somebody.
Yeah, Old Clifty Hoosier Apple Brandy, named after Old Clifty Distillery. So Alan is a distilling historian for Indiana, one of the only ones as far as I know. And so he's done quite a bit of research on pre-prohibition distillers, distilleries, both legal and illicit. And so we have made our mission to kind of make those names household names. While Lee Sinclair and Maddie Gladden weren't distilleries or distillers, they were local legends. We wouldn't exist without Lee Sinclair. Lee Sinclair came in and he built the West Baden Hotel. It burnt down, and then he built the feat that is the West Baden Dome, which back then I think he went through like 20 some odd architects that was like, nope, can't be done, can't be done, can't be done, until he came alongside some unknown kid that said, yeah, I can do this for you. And I know Alan will get into a lot of this, but the Indiana State Police was formed in large part to bring French Lick West Baden under control, because it was such a rural spot and it was equal distance at that time by train from Louisville and Indianapolis and Chicago. A lot of major organized crime syndicates would come there to meet and get their booze. There was, I think, 11 casinos, and not a single of them was legal. There was no legal casino in French Lick West Baden until the current casino that's there is now the only legal casino that's ever been. But the whole area was just thriving on it. Charles Ballard lived there at the time. Charles Ballard owned every single circus in the United States except for P.T. Barnum Circus. So in West Baden, he housed all of his animals during the winter months. So there's just a lot of crazy shit going on in this area, but a lot of illegal in the 6-county region of Orange County, and then all around us, was known as the Black Forest of Indiana. A lot of German settlers, German immigrants come over and settle, and distilling was their birthright, right? So they were doing that. And once Prohibition came and basically was like, you can't do this anymore, they were like, okay, sure. Gave them the big finger and moved their distilleries into the woods where no one would come find them. So a lot of these distilleries and distillers were running for a really long time. When Prohibition hit, they took stills, they burned apple orchards, because apple brandy was the major output of a lot of these distilleries. So they weren't just shutting down distilleries and confiscating stills. They were burning these apple orchards so that these people couldn't do what they had been doing for the longest time. So that's part of what we want to do, is bring a lot of this back. William Dalton was the longest running distiller in Indiana. Our rye whiskey comes out in the fall, named after Solomon Scott, who was both a legal and illicit distiller, known for helping people through the Spanish flu. Going from household to household with his whiskey, because at the time, right, your liquor cabinet and your medicine cabinet were kind of one and the same. And so he was really credited to saving a lot of people's lives, simply going from household to household, dispersing his whiskey. Stamper's Creek is the name of our rum, and that's named after a distillery in Stamper's Creek, Indiana. So we want to try and bring these names, bring these local legends. If we were just to tell the story of Lee Sinclair or Maddie Gladden, you might be able to get it out to a couple of people. And they're interesting stories. And so, Maddie Gladden was a madam at that time, rumored to be a mistress of P.T. Barnum, built a bordello right on Main Street in Salem, which was an extremely conservative town, and started running a bordello right in the middle of the town. So, what a great story. A lot of people know who she is. In Salem, there was a theater teacher who wrote a book and had her as part of it. Her character is part of parades in this area. So what a cool chick. Like, why not name a spicy bourbon after somebody like that? She lived a hard life, too. She died of Bright's disease. Been married like 5 times, shot one of her husbands in the face. They married again like 7 months later. after having been divorced once. So, I mean, these are really fun stories. And so why just name your bourbon like Backstreet Bourbon or whatever you want to name it? Why not name it after these characters who are legends known to the town in which you live or, surrounding counties, and bring a little bit of that local history to your products. And so now, people in New Orleans know who Maddie Gladden is. People in Michigan know who Lee Sinclair is. So you're able to tell these stories and bring these characters back to life simply by putting their face and their story on a bottle. So we've always said this, it's more than just marketing for us. It really is a tribute. Alan takes the first bottle of every run and takes it to these people's graves and pours it out. So we're not looking to have ghosts haunt us. We're not looking to, we want to pay our true and proper respects. So you'll have to ask Alan about that. The site where the distillery was, in the case of the Hoosier Apple Brandy, Old Cliffy, he took a bottle up and poured it out to pay our respects as far as that goes. So we're not trying to, just take and claim it for ourselves either.
That's a really cool idea. I like that one for the homies, pour one
Exactly.
for the homies. Yeah, that's great. I love that.
Yeah.
Super respectful. I love it. So is there just like a whole list of names for products y'all haven't made yet, but the names are all picked out because they're named after people?
We have several on docket, and then some, we really want to use this name for this product, but we've got this product coming out. And so, we've got to think about it. The fun really starts when we do our tasting room single barrels. The tasting room single barrels are where we have our fun. Our barrel-aged absinthe, we called Fascination Street, How We Met You, right? And then we released Unpretentious, which was our high rye bourbon finished in a port cask, which is pretty pretentious as far as bourbon goes. And we called it Unpretentious, and the label was very basic, and we just bullet pointed the back and kind of made fun of the bourbon industry a little bit. On the back, it was just whiskey, drink it. Just a few months ago, we came out with The Right Way, which is our Solomon Scott rye whiskey finished in an absinthe barrel. For those one-offs, we like to be a little snarky and have some fun and kind of poke fun at ourselves, try not to take ourselves too seriously. Sometimes the bourbon industry really gets up its own ass. And I think that's all well and good because I love to taste bourbon and I love to, nose it and pick out all of the smells and all of that. But in the end, we're not curing cancer. So we feel like we should have a little fun along the way. The single barrels, the tasting room releases, that's where we can really be a little bit more irreverent and have more fun with our products.
Gotcha.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
You know those popping phone handle things that you see on everyone's phones nowadays? Well, how would you like to put your logo on them? Does your podcast or band need new merch? Do you want to bring attention to your new book or film? Maybe you need something unique for your Patreon or crowdfunding campaign. Then visit thelogopop.com, where you can customize them with the logo of your podcast, band, business, art, school mascot, or whatever else you can think of. These are way more affordable than you may think at thelogopop.com. Mention where you heard this ad and get free shipping on your entire order. Remember, that's thelogopop.com to order your custom popping phone handles. That's thelogopop.com.
Let's get back into it.
You might not know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Most distilleries and vineyards and whatnot, they don't do these little cheeky side things, these limited edition runs. Like, do you know why you guys do it? I mean, like the Fascination Street is, that's a limited thing. And then the rum and that's limited. And then the weeder, the weeder had a reason, a point. And so that makes sense why it's being phased out. But some of these other things are just sort of, let's just do this just to see if we can, is what it seems like.
Mm-hmm. A lot of cool things that you can do with whiskey as far as finishing goes. And there's a lot of cool things that you can do with whiskey outside of the normal, 3 mash bill box that a lot of, distilleries put themselves in. Lee Sinclair has an alternative grain of oats in it. We've got Morning Glory being released in May, named after a pre-Prohibition tavern. and it's a kasha buckwheat-based mash bill. So we like to do things out of the box just in general. There is no point in starting a distillery right across the river from Kentucky, where Kentucky is known for what they do, right? We're not going to compete with Buffalo Trace. We're not going to compete with Big Bourbon. So why even try? Why even say, hey, we're putting out this bourbon that's the same mash bill as 3 Buffalo Trace mash bills. Come try it. It's better. What is the point of that? We want to be different, and we want to be different from the get-go. So everything that we do is different. The char on our barrels is different. How we age is different. The mash bills are different. We're pot distilled distillery, which is different than Big Bourbon. They all use column stills. And I own a lot of Kentucky bourbon. I drink a lot of Kentucky bourbon. You know, I don't say any of that to say I disagree with Kentucky bourbon. You know, if it weren't for Kentucky bourbon, we probably wouldn't be here right now. But I don't see any point in trying to compete with them. You know what I mean? So everything that we do is different. I think a lot of distilleries do one-offs, but I don't think they do it like we do it. They don't do it with the irreverent sense of humor or poking fun at ourselves or poking fun at our customers. The great thing about the bourbon industry, especially as it grows, and specifically the craft bourbon industry, is that the consumer base of craft bourbon is filled with younger clientele that love to have fun. They love the knowledge. It's similar to craft beer in that you get a lot of what I call bourbon nerds. And I say that with love. And anybody who is a bourbon nerd knows they are a bourbon nerd and wears that badge with pride, because they're the ones that go to Garrison Brothers and ask all the geeky questions, right? Like, what kind of yeast do you use? What temperature do you ferment at? How long is your fermentation? What's your reflux capacity on that still? All of these questions that an everyday, you know, just kind of, oh, I like bourbon, I get it in a cocktail or whatever. They might have a maker's bottle on their shelf in their bar. That is a different customer than what craft bourbon is drawing. All of these podcasts that have popped up based around craft bourbon, all of these podcasts that have popped up getting into the alternative grains, getting into, you know, heritage yeast strains, getting into different types of aging techniques, you know, all of those things that they want to know about. Those people are more apt to pick up our single barrels that are named Unpretentious and The Right Way. You know, we made The Right Way look like a movie poster. The back of it was funny. It's got record and cassettes available on SOFL records. I mean, like, just fun little things as far as that goes. We try not to take ourselves too seriously as far as that goes. It's one of the places where we can kind of let go and show our sense of humor. And I think that is also what brings people to us. We're people. We're having a good time. We like what we do. The winery is the same way. On our social media, I always try and show the staff joking around and being who they are. It's a lighthearted work environment. You know, we like to joke around. We like to have fun. And so I think once people get to know us, it's part of the draw.
Nice. Speaking as a bourbon nerd, or as I call myself, a bourbon snob, I think that what you're saying about the smaller batch stuff and nerds like us is we can literally get those big bourbons, you know, the Buffalo Traces and the, you know, the Maker's Mark and stuff like that, Evan Williams, whatever. We can literally get those in any bar in America. So why would I have that at my bar when I'm gonna get some unique stuff that you can't get at your local bar? I'll have that at my house, and then if I want to get a Maker's Mark and who gives a shit, I'll just go down the street. Again, I guess supposedly sometime everything's going to be open and life's going to go back to normal, and we can go to bars and restaurants and we can order those big things. We can order the Woodford, but if you're going to have somebody over at your house, you're going to pull out something that they've probably never tasted and probably never even maybe heard of. And so I think that's a really fun way to play in the bourbon nerd sandbox, if that makes any sense. So that's really cool.
It definitely does. And I think there's two sides to that sandbox too, right? There's the craft bourbon nerd, and then there's the allocated unicorn bourbon nerd. So you've got both of those when you're releasing a 1-barrel, 200 bottles of finished whiskey at a craft distillery, you're hitting both the crowd that's searching for, that Weller 107 or that Pappy 23 or Pappy 15. You're hitting that group of people that is specifically searching for allocated bottles. And you're also hitting that crowd that's really into craft whiskey. And so I think you're able to get both sides. And I think once you get into bourbon, it's hard not to be on both of those sides. Working for a craft distillery and a craft winery, I love to drink other small wineries' products. I love to drink craft whiskey. I hunt more for craft whiskey, but that doesn't mean when a Weller comes my way, I don't get excited about it. I'm like, hey, it's trade fodder. It's bragging rights. It's being able to show off at your bourbon society. Like, look at this bottle of Blanton's I got. But I don't get as excited for Blanton's as I do for an Iron Root Distillery release in Texas. So you should check them out, by the way. I don't get as excited over that stuff as I do for craft distillery releases. And maybe that's because I work in a craft distillery and I know that, blood, sweat, and tears goes into that. And I know, what it takes to keep something like this running and what it takes to put it out and how much work it is. And so I think that that's a unique viewpoint. And so you have maybe, a better appreciation for those things. I don't know. I love the bourbon community. I think it's filled with great people. I think it's filled with generous people. All you have to do is get on, some message boards on Facebook, and you can even just say, hey, I'm looking to taste X, Y, and Z. And you're going to find 4 people that have that bottle and say, what's your address? I'll send you a 2-ounce sample. Sharing is caring type of thing.
That's really cool. You mentioned some of those, I think you used the word allocated, and that would be stuff like Elmer T. Lee or, like you said, Blanton's. Like, yep. Those are both allocated, right?
Yeah, or like Stag Jr. comes out with a release every year. Old Forester comes out with a birthday bourbon every year. So they release a set number of bottles, or your liquor store purchases so much bourbon from Buffalo Trace. So then they're picked maybe, an antique Weller once a year or something like that. And so then that liquor store holds a raffle to, auction off this bourbon. And sometimes then it's just consumers decide this bourbon is awesome, and all of a sudden it's really hard to get. So, it could be allocated. It could just be, how the secondary market goes as well. There's some ridiculous prices for bourbon out there. But I mean, if you're willing to pay it, I guess, I don't know. I think it's bullshit myself, but I'm also on the industry end of things. I know a lot of people on the other side think it's harmful to bourbon to have that secondary market out there. But people enjoy that. It's a hobby for a lot of people.
I think that there's probably maybe a secondary market for just about everything. For example, the number 1 selling shoe is Nike. Do you know what the number 2 selling shoe is?
No.
Nike resale. So it's just like you were talking about. It's a group of people who are like, oh, these Nikes are dope. I got one. I'll sell it to you for 3 times what I paid for it. Like that. It's insane.
Yep, that's exactly right. We make a lot of jokes like that. So when Unpretentious came out, we made jokes that Unpretentious was going on the secondary market for like $2,000 or, a transfer of Bitcoin. So we tap into that. And I think a lot of our consumers know, we like to have fun with a lot of that. When you see how ridiculous it gets, and when you have a consumer base that buys into that, but also at the same time sees how ridiculous it is, and they can have a sense of humor about it. I think that's what's great about the bourbon community too, is that they can have a sense of humor about themselves and about their buying habits. We're redoing our kitchen right now. So I've tried really hard to stay away from the liquor store for the past couple months, because as you're buying bourbon, I don't think you realize how much money you're spending on it. And then when you sit down and maybe total up, like, wow, that's a lot of money. Even if I'm spending, if I go into the liquor store and I'm like, okay, I'm going to drop $100 today. I would prefer to buy 2 $50 bottles than one $90 bottle. That's just me. But I'm not saying that I won't buy a $95 bottle. So once you realize how much you're spending on bourbon, you kind of, oh, shit, maybe I should chill out for a minute. So it quickly adds up.
That's funny. You sit back, you add all that up and you go, holy shit, that's a kitchen remodel.
Yeah. Right? In a year, or at least the new stove. It's funny how those things add up. On top of then somebody, we've got friends in North Carolina, South Carolina who are going to, distilleries down there. And they're like, hey, I'm going to buy you a bottle of this great craft distillery. We really want you to taste it. And so you've got bottles showing up in the mail too. So you're buying your own. I came home from the liquor store, I don't know, a couple months ago with 2 bottles and showed up and there were like 4 bottles on my porch. And it was like 2 came in the mail and 2 came from a local friend who, wanted me to try them. And it was like, where the hell am I going to put all this? Like, why am I buying this? Like, why? I need to calm down.
I'm going to put in a change of address without your knowledge so that all your mail just gets forwarded to my house.
Right? You'd be happy with some of the results, that's for sure.
I bet I would. So back to where you were saying that you guys aren't trying to compete with the big boys because you're a different product.
Because you can't.
You're probably not old enough for this, but back in the 80s, there was the Cola Wars, which was, Pepsi and Coke were fighting it out. And then RC Cola, their whole campaign was like, we just want to be number 3. Like we're not trying to be them. We're doing our thing. We're really good. So we just want to be number 3.
You can get us out of a vending machine for 50 cents and not for 75. That's
and
kind of you to say. Good. I'm 45, so I remember the Cola Wars. But yeah, there's no point. I don't think that we're going to turn a wild turkey drinker that's been drinking wild turkey for most of his life. I don't see that, But the wild turkey drinker's son, who's just now getting into bourbon and is a little bit into exploration and checking out new flavor profiles. And, bourbon just isn't this tiny little box of what can you fit right here. You can make bourbon with a lot of different grains and a lot of different mash bills. And I think pushing those boundaries and seeing what those flavor profiles can become just off the still, not to mention, adding the barrel and then the different chars and the different aging techniques. So there's a lot to be explored that I don't think a lot of major distilleries are doing. And that's not to say they can't or they won't, but they've had a lot of success at what they're doing. And so that leaves open craft to hit a lot of those other notes.
That makes 1,000% sense. Well, as we're heading out, I know I've kept you for a while, and thank you for being patient with me as far as when this thing got started. Again, I apologize for that.
Oh, my pleasure.
Can you tell everybody where they can find you specifically on social media?
Yes, me specifically, personally, you can find me on Instagram at the Testarossa. And then obviously, business-wise, for all things spiritsofFrenchlick.com. We are on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Spirits of French Lick. For Twitter, we're at Spirits of FL. We're most active on Facebook and Instagram. It's where we've been able to get the most customer interaction. You get to see a lot of behind the scenes stuff on our Instagram stories. Same with the French Lick Winery, FrenchLickWinery.com, or at French Lick Winery on Instagram and Facebook.
Very cool. Can you spell the Testarossa?
The Testarossa, Testarossa.
All right,
like
cool.
the red Italian car.
So, is there anything that we didn't talk about or I didn't ask you about that you wanted to talk about today?
I don't think so. I think we covered a lot, right?
I think we did.
I'm from Southern California. I moved to Indiana. I'm in the booze industry, and here's what I do. I'm the marketing director. I handle all the social media, label designs. Anything that sees the public is generally my doing.
Very cool.
Anything that the public sees, I should say, is generally my doing. If you're interacting with us on social media, you're interacting with me.
I love that you are in charge of the label art. That's super dope.
Thank you. A lot of COVID time went into those labels. Yeah, I'm very, very proud of those labels. Worked with a couple of different designers on those, but oversaw all of the art direction, all of the coloring, and all of that stuff. So really proud of how those turned out.
You should be. Really quick, the limited edition 2-year barrel-aged absinthe label, the Fascination Street Le Bleu. is one of the most beautiful labels I've ever seen on any product, whether it was alcohol or not. That is such a gorgeous, gorgeous label. I know that was commissioned.
Thank you.
But I just want to say it was amazing.
Yeah, Mark Williams did that painting. He does all of those and then he digitizes them. So that painting, I think, in actuality, it's sold at a gallery, but in actuality, it's quite a large painting. So then the next release of the barrel-aged absinthe will probably be next year sometime. And it'll still be called Fascination Street, but it'll have another Mark Williams painting on the back.
Gotcha. Get him to paint my logo on a label. Get him to do that.
I don't think I have control over what Mark paints, but I'll send him your way.
Okay, thanks. Jolee Kasprzak, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day and your hectic COVID schedule to hang out and let us get to know you a little bit better on Fascination Street. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed myself. I appreciate it.
I have also enjoyed myself, and you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Jolee. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Streetwalkers. Just a real quick note here. Shortly after this interview, Jolee and the Spirits of French Lick parted ways. Jolee no longer works there, but this was such a compelling interview that I couldn't not release it. So just know that Jolee no longer works at the Spirits of French Lick. Hey, Streetwalkers, it's time for a giveaway. Thanks to our generous friends at Sylvania, we're going to give away some Bluetooth speakers. What do you think? These are fairly special and limited Fascination Street podcast edition, as they have a little Fascination Street emblem on the end. This oblong Bluetooth speaker is about 8 inches tall and about 3 inches in diameter, and is IPX4 waterproof. So how do you win? Well, what I need all of you to do is post a short video to your Instagram story, your Facebook story, or even your TikTok, telling everybody why you love Fascination Street Podcast and which is your favorite episode. Make sure to tag the show in these videos, and each week I'll pick one winner to win one of these special limited edition Sylvania Bluetooth speakers, and I'll mail it to you. And I might even throw a couple of other Fascination Street pod swag in there as well. So tell a friend, tell all your friends, and include it in your stories on Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok. And don't forget to tag the show, Fascination Street Podcast. Opening music is the song Magnolia from the 2014 album Intransigence, used with permission from Douglas Miles Clarke. Closing music is Apollo from the 2001 album Into the Known by the band Sapphire. Thanks for hanging out with us and getting to know a little bit about our guest. We'll see you next time on Fascination Street.